I will do that as well.
Okay. And I believe the YouTube recording will be available within
YouTube
24
recording
hours.
will be available by tomorrow morning for everyone to see as well. And I'll send you all the link to that as well. But it's a public link.
It'll be a gift to my wife. How's that?
Oh, there you go.
Honey,
all right.
Happy anniversary.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Well, it's actually good afternoon. My name is JJ Risha. I am with Pismo Ventures. Also a member of Techos Angels, been investing in companies for over 13 years now. Pismo Ventures is a venture studio where we help startups with their startup needs. We help them become investable. We invest in them, and then we help them raise capital as well. The Startup Symposium is a series of a symposium that we will have this year, starting with life science. Life science is our first symposium for the year. We will have potentially a B2B and a B2C symposium later during the course of this year. This first symposium for life science only, first time we do this. We had 98 companies sign up or apply for the symposium. We will have an event on Thursday, the 31st at 12 noon, where we will have 12 companies that were selected by a selection committee of life science investors to present to a larger group of investors. We should have about 50 or so investors at the panel on Thursday. Also, the top 3 companies will be introduced to potentially more investors and VCs across the nation as part of our promise to expose the winners of the symposium to other investors across the nation. Our panel today is composed of very experienced panelists from the life science community. I will hand it over to Jeff. So Jeff, he can introduce everyone. Welcome everyone. And I will be in the background while everybody is discussing, since I'm not a life science person. So I'll let you take it, Jeff, from here.
Thank you, JJ. Thank you, Quan. Thank you both for inviting me to moderate this panel. The panel is called Positioning Your Startup for Success. And that's what we're going to try to do today. You've all heard of what's called asymmetric information. You've all experienced it. When you take your car into the mechanic, who knows more, the mechanic or you? When you as a patient go into a surgeon, who knows more, the surgeon or you? That asymmetry leads to difficulties in navigating and making good choices. The purpose of this and the purpose of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs in general is to make it a level playing field and to provide you with symmetric information so you can make the best choices. So I would like to advance my screen if I could, but it's not cooperating. So I'm going to stop the share for a moment, start it again, and see if I can get it to work. Okay, JJ, any clues here?
I don't know. I don't have any. Oh, here we go. It's working.
I don't know what happened. So we're going to discuss ways of commercializing based on market need. And that's something that many of us don't think about when you're first starting out. You say, I have something that I think will be great, but without really understanding the market need, you can be making a great widget, but nobody really is going to use it. So that's part of what we'll talk about today. So just a little bit of background about myself. I am trained as an otolaryngologist, facial plastic surgeon at Yale University, practiced for 25 years, went back and got an MBA at Johns Hopkins, followed by a degree in organizational development at George Washington University, at which time my children said, Dad, you have too many letters after your name, you have to stop. So I did, and I became a full-time entrepreneur. My first foray into the business world is that I build and operate assisted living facilities for Alzheimer's and dementia care patients. We have 6 of them in the Midwest. And what it taught me is that while physicians are smart and can make a very good living with their practice, when it comes time to commercializing and innovation, we lack the expertise and the experience to make that a smooth journey. So myself and two of my colleagues, Arlen Myers and Stephen Levine, started a non-for-profit organization called SOAP, the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. We have about 32,000 LinkedIn members now throughout the world. And it's great because we're able to tell you what are the opportunities, what are the obstacles to bring your particular idea to market. And it was at a SOAP-related pitch event that I met the CEO of a biotech company called Biofactura that I met about 10 years ago. Biofactura specializes in biodefense and biosimilars. Since that time, I have had a steep learning curve in terms of what biopharmaceutical research, development, and manufacturing is all about. I'm now the chairman of the board of that company, the chief medical officer, and co-manage the company with my CEO, Daryl Sampe. And with that information and with that background, I am proud to pronounce a great panel today who is willing to share their experiences, their knowledge, their mistakes, and their successes with all of you. Errol, would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, Jeffrey, thank you. And thank you for that lead in. My name is Errol Arkledge. I am the Chief Innovation Officer for the University of California, Irvine. I'm also the Executive Director of the Beal Applied Innovation Center. At Beal, we are responsible for tech transfer at the UC Irvine campus. We're responsible for industry-sponsored research, technology licensing, as well as new venture creation and enterprise collaboration. Before my role here at UCI, I was a venture capitalist at a firm called M34 Capital, and we focused exclusively on academic spinouts. We currently have an active portfolio, and I sit on the boards of 3 companies, 2 of which are life science companies. Prior to that, I was an SBIR program manager at the National Science Foundation, and also responsible for the Innovation Core program at NSF. I'm an entrepreneur by heart and have a track record of taking technologies out of academic labs. And last startup out of an academic lab was Strategent Life Science, a drug delivery platform with technology license from Stanford and from Berkeley. I've been doing this for about 25, almost 30 years.
Thank you, Errol. Erica, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you, Jeff. My name is Erica Bechtold. I'm currently the Vice President of US Strategy for a company called Image Biopsy Labs. Prior to this new role that I just started 2 weeks ago, I was the Director of Technology Commercialization at a place called the Wyss Institute, which is embedded within Harvard University. And I've been in the Boston area for about 12 years. I've held a variety of different roles in early stage academic spinouts, as well as in technology licensing offices and in technology licensing functions. At Image Biopsy Lab, we are aiming to develop a machine learning system to really help shift the way people think about MSK conditions, musculoskeletal radiology in general, and sort of shift it more to a patient-centric opportunity where clinicians are better able to diagnose disease. Hospitals, in partnership with their clinicians, are better able to route folks to surgery who need it. And the company, which has been around for about 4 years, has basically built out an expertise exclusively in MSK with 4 products CE marked already and 1 FDA cleared. And so we're just getting ready to launch in the US and really bring this into prime time. So it's great to be here in that capacity. In my free time, I'm also the Vice President of US Operations at a 3D printing company called UpNano. I share my time between both because we all connect back to the same angel syndicate group that started both companies, and they're both based in Vienna, Austria. So it's very exciting to be their US support and think through commercial launch strategies. Thank you.
That's great, Erica. I love the name Biologically Inspired Engineering. I think that's great and should inspire many entrepreneurs out there as well. Darren, please say hello to everyone.
Yeah. Hey, folks. Thanks, Jeff. My name is Darren Cook. I'm currently the Executive Director of the Life Sciences Entrepreneurship Center at UC Berkeley. Berkeley LSEC is really the grout between the tiles being the fantastic resources that the campus already has, And we provide wayfinding and some academic support and some curriculum, entrepreneurship curriculum. Also professional faculty at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. I teach various entrepreneurship courses there. And also the chair of the bio track at Berkeley Skydeck. Berkeley Skydeck is UC Berkeley's top startup accelerator in downtown Berkeley. We take 20 to 24 companies to be resident actually at UC Berkeley every 6 months, invest $200,000 in them, give them advisory support, focused investor introductions, and a huge demo day. So going way back in time though, I originally was an engineer at UCSF working on cochlear implants in the ENT department. At the same time, a mechanical engineering grad student at UC Berkeley. I threw that all out the window back in the mid-90s, went to law school, was a patent litigator for a number of years in the life sciences space, moved in-house to Biorad Laboratories, mid-sized public company maker of life science research tools, ran the IP department there for 10 years. And then in 2015, threw that out the window and started doing what I'm doing now. To the point, I'm a member of Life Science Angels, a large seed stage investment group. In that group, I ran med device and digital health selection from 2017 to 2018. I was on the board for a number of years. And that brings us back to what I'm doing now.
Great. Thank you, Darren. Appreciate it. Nishta, can you please introduce yourself to the group?
Thanks very much, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me on this panel. My name is Nishta Rao, and I lead the growth and development of the life science vertical at First Republic Bank. And what we really do is work very closely with companies at all stages, from really early stage companies that are SBIR, SDTR funded, to seed stage, all the way to companies that are publicly traded. And the way that we work with these companies, of course, from the banking side, but also from their growth in the life sciences space, seeing what they need, how can we add value to their operations from the financial side, but also from the scientific and the business operations side. So really a very holistic approach to banking, if you will. My background, I'm a molecular biologist by training, have been both in academia as well as in the industry. So have seen things from both sides of the aisle, if you will, and really excited to be here and participate in this discussion today.
And I'll just add that Nishta is also an alumnus of the Carey School of Business, so it's always good to have someone from Hopkins here on the panel. Thank you so much, Nishta.
Thanks, Jeff.
Oh, it has stopped. So I think that takes care of our, do we introduce everyone? Yes? Good. Kwan, did you want to say hello to everyone, or?
No, the floor is yours, Jeff, and everyone.
Okay, very good. So we started the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs because there was a significant disconnect between the entrepreneurial community and the user community, the physicians who actually use the products. And we said to ourselves, you know, we know what's in our toolkit. We know what we need in our toolkit. We know what we would use in our toolkit. We know what our patients need. So we created this organization in order to work with entrepreneurs and give them that insight, give them that understanding of market need. So let's talk a little bit about market need and customer discovery. So Errol and Darren, I know this is the passion of yours. Why don't you tell us how you define it, and why is it important? Why should young startups think about what the customer wants?
Darren, I'll cede the floor to you.
Oh, I was going to say, Errol, you should go first as the inventor of iCore. But I'm happy. I mean, Jeff is right. I love to talk about this stuff. So if I may, I think number one, most people think that they understand what customer discovery is just based on the words, right? Customer discovery. Customers are people who buy stuff, and discovery sounds like finding them, right? So is this a business development exercise? You're finding more people to buy your idea? It's not. Right. So the way we define it in a customer discovery course, whether it's Lean Startup, iCore, many programs use different names, but with a similar curriculum, is a customer is anyone who can affect whether your idea is adopted. So this could be anyone in the ecosystem if they have a role to play in the adoption of your solution. In fact, it includes saboteurs, the competition, really anyone that might have a say. And then discovery, for those of you who are unfortunate to know about what this word means in a litigation context, it really is in a litigation context. It means finding out, just like learning more about these folks that are in your ecosystem. And so it's just a process of hypothesizing about what the problems could be and what their motivations are, and finding them, going out and talking to them and learning from them.
So Errol, do us a favor and describe what the process is. How does one go about initiating customer discovery? Can a startup do it by themselves? Do they have to do it in a structured environment? How do you go about this?
Well, I liken it to the scientific method and uncovering the unknowns of your business and business model ecosystem. So like Darren said, using the term customer discovery, it's almost unfortunate that those two words are what have become known as really stakeholder mapping. And the customer discovery process is really nothing other than the scientific method applied to stakeholder mapping, so that you basically draw out the entire ecosystem, which includes, as Darren said, your competition, which includes your partners, which includes potential saboteurs, which includes the entire buying stack. And the approach that you take is you go in with a set of hypotheses around all of those elements of the stakeholders, and then through a approach of testing your hypothesis, you refine them in response to market truth. And so the process really is, as I've said, simply a scientific method. It can absolutely positively be done on a non-cohort or non-structured manner. The structure I happen to like is the one that revolves around the business model canvas, and there are 3 or 4 business model canvases that are powerful. But having some sort of laboratory notebook is helpful in the process, but it doesn't have to be structured.
So it's interesting that you say that you're putting in many different layers of stakeholders in this discovery process, not all of whom are actually customers, some of whom may actually be competitors. So having that in mind, there must be some industries where customer discovery works better than others. Give us some examples of industries or technologies that a customer discovery process works really well, is very straightforward, and can be done relatively easily, versus others that this is really hard and I'm not sure if the data I'm getting is really going to help me.
So
I'm just going to add very quickly to what Darren and Errol spoke about. You know, one of the reasons why it's so important is, especially if you're looking at things from the life sciences side, where it takes generally a longer time for a product to get to market. Many investors, and you know, we're always in a chicken and egg situation, right? We need data, but we need money, but we need data. So the issue is that for a life science investor, most of the time you're investing on the potential of something because there is no product. So for a life science investor, it's very important to understand what that ROI is going to be. And so the market is very important, whether it's the total market, whether it's a target market, whether it's something that is low-hanging fruit. It's very important for both the founder, the team, as well as the investor to be on the same page on that. That's one thing. The second thing is, it is very difficult. You asked which is an easy technology versus which is this going to be difficult for. I think for the therapeutic side, I mean, things are always changing. So it's something that's, you're going to have to constantly keep an eye on the market and see what else is happening. And it is an educated guess that you take in some respects, but it's something that you constantly have to keep an eye out as well.
So I think you bring up a very good point, Nishta, is that not only is the customer discovery process important for the entrepreneur in terms of the proof of concept and the moving forward with a technology, but to engage investors, that has to be a very thorough process in order to sell your investors that your idea is going to work and that you've done your homework.
Yeah.
Erica, any other? Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to amplify that point, just because I find it's interesting that this has happened more and more. A bit of background: a classic customer discovery course, whether it's Lean Launchpad, Lean Startup in an academic setting, or I-Corps run by the NSF or the NIH, they expect you to do 100 interviews over the course of a defined set of time. But 100 interviews, which is a big ask, and is truly transformative from interview 1 to interview 100. I work with people on the investment side, people within Life Science Angels, who expect that companies applying to us have done those 100 interviews. And I work with an investor who will straight up ask for a list of who did you talk to, because believe it or not, he wants to spot check it, and he does. So it's becoming more and more important, even from the investing side. All right, Erica.
No, it's all good. I mean, I agree with all of the above, right? If you can't do real customer discovery, you can't gear your product to be effective in the market, right? And you can't really define your market entry strategy. The only other thing I'd add, an old mentor and friend of mine recommended a book when I was first starting out, because I have no business degree. So I've made this up as I go along on the business side. It's called Crossing the Chasm. I don't know if anyone's read that book. It's it was written in 91, I think. So it's an older book around high-tech software, the launch of a lot of these types of Googles, if you will. But it walks through, there's so many implications in life science as well, I think, right? In terms of not only do you define a market and define a need and define your customer, but then there are folks that are early adopters and there are folks that come along much later. And I think also, seeing down the road what your challenges as a startup will be and making sure you have sufficient runway. It's not good enough to just get a product approved and assume the rest has worked out because you did customer discovery, right? It's so critical to anticipate those other challenges as well. And I would encourage everyone to the sooner you could also think about those pieces that will sneak up and surprise you as you go to actually launch the product, the sooner the better.
I agree. And you made me look at my bookcase, because I remember there were 2 books that I wanted to recommend also. One is Blue Ocean Strategy, and the other is The Titanic Effect. The Titanic Effect was written by a SOAP member out in the Midwest. And both books are excellent reading for startups and young entrepreneurs. So get back to my question in terms of, are there technologies that really lend itself to customer discovery and technologies that it's a really tough road to hoe? Or do all technologies lend itself to customer discovery in some fashion or not?
Jeffrey, I think it really is an assessment of whether or not there's some underlying structure that you can discover. And to me, if there's no underlying structure that you can discover, customer discovery is very difficult to apply. And an example might be a song or a video game. Those things are hits driven. Nobody knows what the secret is to those particular industry segments. They become. And so it's very difficult to discover any underlying principles there. But if there are underlying principles, the industry is structured, you just don't happen to know what that structure is, you can discover them. You can actually uncover them through assessment. And so I think that it really isn't about a technology or even an industry. It's about the structure and whether or not there is some ground truth there.
I was thinking that something like a digital health app lends itself very well to customer discovery because you could look at that end user and make that interface really friendly and interactive and engaging for that end user.
And there's a whole series of there's a value chain between that end user and you that you can, quote, discover. And there are stakeholders in that value chain that act as archetypes, and you can understand who they are. And so I think that is a perfect example of a structured structured industry that lends itself well.
And I'm just going to add to that, that's a really great example, the digital space. And we're seeing a lot of that convergence happen, right, between life science, healthcare, and technology. And you can also update your assumptions pretty much in real time because things are happening quicker. And so that might be an example where you're getting, you're assuming certain things, but then you're also getting feedback in a quicker manner.
Okay.
So Jeff, sorry, quick question. What was the second book? The first one was Blue Ocean Strategy. What was the other book?
The Titanic Effect.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So in terms of this structure, if I'm making a biosimilar to an immuno-oncology drug, I would think that would be a harder discovery process because going to patients who may or may not know whether they need this particular drug, you really can't do that. Going to physicians, maybe, but getting a hold of physicians is a little harder. But then think of all of the steps and processes along the way of regulatory approval, of market share, of competitors. Some is public knowledge, some is not public knowledge. The manufacturing and the difficulties in doing that, the financing and investors that you need for hundreds of millions of dollars. Or for an biosimilar, less than $100 million, that's a more difficult task for a discovery process, wouldn't you think?
It is harder. But just like you laid out, there are a lot of people to talk to and to understand in that ecosystem that does lend itself to customer discovery. It's just, and you're exactly right, Jeff, it's harder to get them in a conversation.
Right.
It's interesting, the NIH runs an ICOR version of ICOR itself, where a whole room is nothing but therapeutics. So 8 teams will do it all at once. They're all therapeutics teams. It's fair to say that they are looking for and talking to different people than the folks that are in the digital health room. Absolutely. But you hit it exactly right. They're looking for strategics, for licensors, understanding delivery mechanisms. The way that the coaches in a therapeutics ICOR room will push the teams in a very different directions.
Yeah.
Okay. So by extending that a little bit, if you look at your product as beyond just the biosimilar itself, and think of your product as the company, and that you're getting ready to take the company out, and you have to understand who the customers of your company are through partnerships, you can get in a generalization where you think more broadly about customer discovery, where the value propositions are the value propositions of your company to a said partner, as opposed to the value propositions of your biotherapeutic to an end user, as an example.
Mm-hmm. Erica, I'm sure you've done customer discovery. Can you share with us an example of a good customer discovery interaction and maybe a bad one?
Sure. I have both led customer discovery efforts and supported them. So during my time at Sofregen, which was a spin out of Tufts University, we had silk biomaterials that we were commercializing. and we had products, we got a product cleared for vocal cord augmentation. And that was a market where there were some competitors, but it wasn't necessarily clear what laryngologists were looking for in terms of a product profile. It was really helpful to speak to clinicians directly. We actually conducted a primary market research study because, looking into the literature for clues was not sufficient, right? And really we needed to understand the limitations of the current products, not from what's published, but from a practical, like shelf life, how it feels for a patient, the fact that laryngologists wanted to do these vocal cord augmentation procedures in office, not in the OR. And all of these pieces came out by only talking with folks who would be the end users of the products, right? And so that was one where even thinking through the product design aspects for us in terms of, should it be packaged in a syringe? Is it something that they mix and then they add? Do they want to do it themselves? Like, these are potentially huge efforts that the company invests into designing the product, but you only learn about it by doing this type of customer discovery up front.
What's the name of that product, Erica?
It's called Silk Voice. So you can find it online now. Yeah, it's called Silk Voice. It was something I was really proud to support and work on. And it's made of silk, hence the name, silk fibrin from the silkworm, which is really cool. And I will anonymize the efforts that didn't go well since this is being recorded. But, one thing that I see as a challenge during my time working, certainly at Harvard, but also at other academic settings, is that sometimes a product will be built so beautifully and it's so differentiated from anything that's out there, truly. And, let's say it's something that is an adhesive that binds very tightly, or let's say it's a, bionic leaf that's been, printed in such a way that you have this sort of artificial leaf model. Very cool stuff, beautiful paper. Is there a commercial market? It's not clear. There was sort of no customer discovery done. And then sometimes these teams will get very excited because the publications will get traction and they will not spend enough time upfront thinking through the product strategy and who is the customer and is there a market at all? Do people care that I made this beautiful thing? I'm just picking on those two as examples, but this happens a lot in academia. And I do think that, like the I-Core program, when I've been able to route teams through that program, it has been tremendously helpful to them, right? Because it's methodical and it forces people to go through that process, right? 100 interviews is a lot, especially for somebody who's like a full-time grad student, right? But after about the first 15 or 30, it's remarkable how things do start to shift in their thinking, right? And even the way they're pitching stuff. So I've seen people go too far down the road where they haven't thought through this. Or even worse, we haven't talked about reimbursement yet. They get so far down this, there is a market, I'm differentiated, but actually like payers will never reimburse this, right? And
I don't have a code and who's going to pay for this? We're going to talk about that. We're going
to get there. But anyway, those are also major mistakes if you invest a lot of money before you figure that out.
Right. So it's interesting when you talk about customer discovery and pitching, because when I look at it, I think that pitching is really a part of customer discovery. You learn a lot from investors that you pitch to that either like you and accept you and write a check, or that say, no, thank you, and pass. So Nishta, I'm sure you've been the target of customer discovery for many years. Tell us what was good and what was bad and what our young entrepreneurs should be looking to improve.
Well, I think, what's very important, and Erica touched on this, is to think through the strategy. It's not just about figuring out mechanism of actions or from the scientific side, don't get me wrong, the science is what everything is based on. But it's also very important to see where that leads to. How are you going to translate it? Why should somebody invest in you? Right? That's the big question. And that's there's a few important things there. IP is very important, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. Management team is very important. But also, where is this leading to? Again, the customer discovery part shows that there is a market, that the product will be viable. And that's very important because you can check all the boxes, right? And go through all the different stages. But then in the end, if you end up with a product that nobody's going to buy, what good is it? Especially if, going through clinical trials, it's so expensive, it takes such a long period of time. So that is why, especially for life sciences, when you're looking at this through a long-term lens, it's really crucial to make sure that before you start out, you have an idea as to who's going to use it and if it's something that will be used. So that's something that I always look for. And if it's another Me Too, or if it's another, product that's already there, tell me why yours is going to be the one that people use. And so I think that's, it's up to the founder to know the space well enough, because, as investors, as other folks that come in and see the company from time to time, I mean, we have a general idea of what the landscape is, but it's the founder that really should know the space better than anyone else, right? So I think if the founder can make a compelling case as to why this is going to be a really great product when it comes into that stage, I think that's what we all look for, whether it's as a partner, as an investor, as somebody who's co-developing a technology. That is what is going to drive either investment or partnerships.
Totally agree. So this week is Bio Europe Conference Week, and it is in a digital format. And this is a life science focused conference where you go in and you have partnering meetings with anywhere from 20 to 60 different companies around the world. And you could do it sitting in your office and see people from China in the morning to Australia in the evening. And it's a wonderful, efficient way of getting around the world. And really, when I do this, and I'm in the middle of doing this now, and when I speak to potential partners and potential commercialization partners or distribution partners or manufacturing partners, that is totally a discovery process. Because you learn, even if they're not the right partner for you, you learn things about what the insiders are saying about the industry, about the market, about your competitors, that may not be public knowledge, but is valuable for you in terms of being the entrepreneur and how you move forward. So, Errol and Darren, you've taught this to many people. Give the audience some examples of when people have done it totally right and when they have fallen on their faces.
So I've got an example of a team. It was the same team that did it right and did it wrong. And so I like to call them the four Ivy League pulmonologists, because they were four Ivy League pulmonologists who showed up in an I-Corps class. Four 30-something guys, which was very unusual because most I-Corps teams will have, typical would be a grad student and then a professor and then an industry mentor or somebody else. But these, were four pulmonologists. And frankly, they came in with a device for COPD. And fair to say, they were confident that this was going to be a big hit. And we almost threw them out in the first week. They almost quit in the first week because they didn't really get it and they didn't really like any sort of feedback or pushback from non-pulmonologists. And they started the course week after week going out and talking to COPD patients. They would come back and say, guess what? We were right. Nobody wants COPD. We're on the right track. And we as the teaching team had to push them and say, well, we get that. We trust you on that point. But have you talked to contract manufacturers? Have you talked to the payer? Have you talked to the buying, whoever's going to make the purchase decision in the hospital? And force them to do those interviews. And they did. In the old days, in the NSF I-Corps, we made teams stand up at the end and declare go or no go, right? Literally in big letters. Say whether they have found it product market fit, problem solution fit, whatever you want to call it. They have found it and they're a go, or they're a no-go. They're scrapping the whole thing. They have to do more research, whatever it is. This team that couldn't have been more confident in the beginning stood up and said they were a no-go.
Important lesson to learn. Errol, any examples in your teachings?
Well, I think the what I'll reflect on is the attitudes that really lend themselves to success in the process, and then I'll give you an example. And the attitudes really revolve around curiosity and what we call the child's mind. You have to be willing to go into this with an understanding that there's parts of the world that you just don't know, and that your job is to try to figure them out and develop an insight. So if your company or your business or your startup doesn't have some special insight that others don't have, whether it's a market angle or it's a product feature set or it's some technical capability, the probability of you being successful is like zero. And you don't know what that insight is going in, so you have to discover it. And so that really is the key to get to something significant. And in order to have that insight, my experience is that you have to go in with the child's mind. And following up with what Erica said, and my experience is it takes about 20 interviews to be able to really understand how to do it well. And it takes about 60 in order to see some common threads through the noise. The signal to noise ratio can be pretty low. And so there's not a lot of signal, and there's a lot of noise in customer discovery. An example of one going really well was a company I subsequently invested in, but they had developed a product that was working on helping plants absorb phosphorus out of the soil. And absorbing phosphorus out of the soil is a big challenge in most of the world, just not so much in the United States. And so they had known that this was a big challenge in most of the world. And when they went out and spoke to farmers in the United States, they identified that, in fact, this wasn't something that farmers in the United States had on their top 5 challenges. And so they continued to explore and continue to explore. They ended up finding an application. I won't bore you with the details, but it took literally 75 or 80 interviews to get to the point where they had that aha moment, and then like another 300 after that to really prove to themselves that there was something there that was worth doing. And there's no way they could have done that if they hadn't gone in with that open mind and that child's mind and been able to absorb that information.
So really applying the scientific method with iterative experimentation and questioning was resulted in making something out of nothing.
That's right. And it reminds me of a famous quote by the great physicist Richard Feynman, that the most important thing in science is to not fool yourself, and you're the easiest one to fool. And my experience is that the cognitive biases that we bring to the table in the customer discovery process can often hinder the progress being made. And in particular, well, there's a handful of cognitive biases, but confirmation bias is by far the hardest to get past.
How could you not like what I'm doing?
Right.
That is so true. And the number of times I've come in to check on folks that I'm supporting, during my time at Harvard who are doing this, and like looking at their interview questions and seeing all the leading questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bias has crept into how they've even structured the questions, and it won't be useful, right? It's so true.
All right. So it's my understanding that one of the key milestones of the I-Core program and of customer discovery is to create a minimal viable product. Am I correct? Tell us why it's so important to create an MVP, and what do you do? What do you do with that group, with that cohort, after they've created it? Where do they go with it? How do they advance that technology? Erica, I'll start with you.
You're starting with me?
I'll start with you. you've been to a place where you have a core minimal viable product. What do you do next?
Follow the money and figure out how to launch it. I just, one thing that I would say, just picking up on the previous point that I was thinking about, and it ties in with this point is, if you're launching a product, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're like all in doing this, you have to also be able to hustle. And I think a lot of folks feel that, they can't do the right market research, or they can't get at some of these questions because it's like they don't have the money to engage a market research firm. But it's not true, right? The I-Corps program is free if you apply. And, I twice, when Bio came, you mentioned Bio as a partnering meeting, when it came to Boston, I volunteered at Bio so I could get a free entrance ticket, right? So I would volunteer for 2 days, like cleaning out the trash, and then I would have partnering meetings for 2 days. So, I mean, you really just have to go for it. So I did just want to make that point to folks to give them some hope. All right, so I have a minimal viable product that I'm ready to launch. What do I do next?
Right.
Is it a device or a therapeutic?
Whatever you want it to be.
Oh, geez. Well, I guess for therapeutics, really for both, right? For regulated products in this space, the good news is, assuming we had sufficient funds to do what we need to do, is it's extremely prescribed for the most part, right? If it's a therapeutic, you need to get way in the weeds on what's required to bring that to market. And it really is checking all the boxes and doing that very methodically and building the right team who can help you execute. With device, it's a little weird, right? Because we have different regulatory offshoots that you could go. Is it a combination product? Is it a class 2? Is it a class 3? But essentially, you're still doing all the same basic experiments to start, right? So I would, if I were launching a new product, take a step back, figure out what my strategy is, regulatory wise, and then figure out how to smartly structure and design the experiments I needed to do to make sure that I didn't make a mistake. Because if you don't design the product properly and you do a pilot safety or tox study, then you change the product, well, now you have to go back and do it again. And it was all a waste, and it was a total waste of time, and it was a waste of money. So I really think mapping that out, because it is regulated, this world is regulated products, right? And so doing it thoughtfully and well is critical.
Right. So experimentation by design is a key, principle in biomanufacturing. You have to really design your experiments so that they are optimized to try to give you the answers you're looking for. Nishta, what do you think about what would you do with your minimal viable product? Or so what would you like your clients, what do you want to see your clients to be doing with it?
So I think just, exactly as Erica mentioned, I mean, it's a great starting point to see what works, what doesn't work, what could you do better in terms of customer discovery. If we're talking about an app or a health tech or a digital device, is it viable? So I think it gives the team the opportunity to go back, get a 2.0 version if required. But really, it's a checkpoint to see if things are going the way they should be, if the product is going to be successful. And also, I think if things do go well, I mean, it's a great opportunity to get more investors interested as well.
Darren?
Yeah, so I have a different conception of MVP. Typically, an MVP is something that you create after you do the 100 customer discovery interviews, and you think you found some huge unmet clinical need that is worthy of creating an MVP, a minimum viable product. It's not so much a product. In fact, it's not a product at all that you're going to sell. It's a set of features and ideas that you want to further test. So I think of it in the design thinking realm. User interviews is what happens first, and that's really customer discovery. And the next step would be prototype testing, which would be the MVP. And so this is something that you can either figuratively or literally put in front of customers just to understand how they respond to it.
And how do you get from the MVP to the next stage?
Yeah, so that's a question for somebody who's expert in the next stage. So my whole world is the earliest stage.
Getting them to that MVP.
Yep.
And then you hand them off. Where should we tell our attendees to go to get handed off to?
But that's part of the discovery process. I mean, you're in an environment where there is steps of value creation, and your job is to figure out what that organization structure is for that next value inflection standpoint. And that's a perfect. I mean, if you're looking for a Series B investor, you want to know what thresholds you have to meet to get to a Series B investment, who better to talk to than a Series B investor? And so similarly with respect to strategic partnerships, what better organization to talk to than potential strategic partners? So I think that that's the generalization of the customer discovery beyond just who the person who's benefiting from the product is, that you have to consider. And in a regulatory and in a highly structured ecosystem like life sciences, you can actually find those people to have those conversations.
So I sit on the board of the Commonwealth of Virginia Gap Life Sciences Fund, and I act as a judge for many of their competitions, as well as George Washington University, that they're having an innovation competition next week that I'm judging at. And it is clear that some entrepreneurs come very well prepared for these events, and some are really clueless beyond that MVP proof of concept. Look at what I've done, look at what I've discovered, look at what the need is. If you don't come to an event like this with a very clearly defined and good understanding of the regulatory pathway, how to build quality controls into your company and into your product, of reimbursement and coding and payers, you will fail. Because I'll be the first one to get up there and ask you a question that you'll look at me cross-eyed and say, I really don't know. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening, make sure you have that down pat, because those are essentials in terms of what either a strategic partner or an investor is looking at, to understand that you understand not only your technology and your science, but you have a good understanding of how to commercialize that product.
Jeff, could I jump in there for just a second?
Shoot.
So one of the things that we've been talking about in the last hour is customer discovery as a discovery process. And in a regulatory environment, I like to distinguish between those elements of your business that are unknown and those elements of your business that are not known. And they really do represent two types of uncertainty. The unknown you have to discover, and there's no more powerful tool known to mankind than the scientific process for discovery. The not known you can learn about, and the FDA regulatory pathway, for instance, is well trodden. There are different strategies, of course, but the FDA is not where you want to experiment with your company. You want to find somebody who knows that process cold, and then talk to them. And that's you're educating yourself for sure, but it's kind of the difference between primary and secondary research. Primary research, you're in the field and you're discovering things that nobody in the world has ever known before. Secondary research is you're at the library, and you really have to understand the differences between the two in the context of life sciences, because as I said, you don't want to experiment with your company for things that you can just pick up the phone and get the ground truth on.
Errol, I'm just going to very quickly piggyback off of what you said. I think that's an incredibly important point. Don't reinvent the wheel where you don't have to. There are certain things where you should not reinvent the wheel. And so I think that's where what you alluded to, speaking with folks that really know the space, is very important. There's the life science community. I mean, we're a tight-knit, small community. And I think we all feel the pain of, how long it takes to get things to market, how expensive it is. And I think a lot of success can be found by just speaking with people, whether it's at conferences, at pitches. Excuse me. These are things that folks have done before us, right? And so I think it's very important to the audience that's here to take that initiative, to make that extra connection, because you never know where that's going to lead to. And there's always so much information out there that could be relevant or not. I mean, but it's good for you to get that information. So I think just a little nugget here, having seen a few of these things happen, it's always good to understand the information that's there that you can use, and also to try and just know your space well enough that understand where you want to go, and try and speak with folks that are experienced in your area.
So I want to talk a little bit about timing. And those of us in the life sciences, whether you're in a device or a therapeutic, other than digital therapeutics, you have to be thinking of the long game. This is not a quick turnaround for most of us who are in this space. And that's a very different mindset than most investors are looking at, and most investors are willing to accept as a reasonable time to return their investment. So you have to be able to convince them that you're worth waiting for, and you have to be able to convince industry that you're worth waiting for. So I'm going to give you an example. For the last 5 years, I've been going to these partnering meetings talking about one of our lead biosimilar asset, ustekinumab Stelara, because we make it in a proprietary platform that looks almost identical to the reference product, down to the Dalton, down to the glycans, down to the charge heterogeneity. This molecule looks like a fingerprint. And I'm showing this to the Sandozes, to the Mylins, to the Pfizers. And for the last 5 years, they said, that's great. It looks great. Come back when you have clinical data. So part of the discovery process is understanding when is the appropriate time to approach industry. So the end of that prologue was that we now have clinical data from our phase 1 clinical trial, and we have reached every parameter of our primary endpoints to the 95th confidence interval. And now all of a sudden, industry wants to talk to me. So I'm very busy now talking to all these potential commercialization and distribution partners. So in your experience, when is the best time to start that discussion, to start that engagement? Because I see young companies that just don't even have proof of concept, that in their pitch deck, they're saying, yes, we've met with Pfizer and Merck and Boehringer Ingelheim, and they're all very interested in our technology. I'm saying, really? What's your advice to these young entrepreneurs?
I'll very quickly say it's never too early to speak with anyone, industry, investors, partners, potential partners. I think a lot of it has to do with developing a relationship, and for industry to get to know you, to be comfortable with you, to understand where your research started, where it's going. I think it's, I've seen companies that are very early stage that will speak with industry, will get a positive response from industry, not saying that, industry wants to buy the company right off the bat, but they're interested in seeing what the next step might be. Interesting in perhaps co-developing a molecule down the road when it's been sufficiently de-risked. Now, that's not the only thing a young startup should be doing. That is one of the things. They also need to be, speaking with folks that could help them today, whether that's, seed funding, whether that's angels, whether that's your Series A. So it's going to have to be a multi-pronged approach, but industry is definitely interested in early stage technologies and companies. So that's definitely one of the strategies that they should employ. And the other thing is, never start thinking about something when or after you realize you need it. Always keep all options open and start those discussions. I mean, maybe it's something that you won't need or you don't want to do when you get to 6 months or a year from now. But at least start having those conversations, because it's really important to start these types of relationships before you actually need it. Because if you haven't done anything and you actually need some sort of help, and then you're going out and trying to develop those relationships, it's going to be too late.
Nishna, I agree totally. And I think if you have the mindset that you're doing this in the vein of customer discovery, as opposed to touting that, oh, they like my technology, it's a much better sell and much better process for that entrepreneur to say, this is why it's important. Erica, any thoughts about timing?
Yeah, no, I would agree. Early and often makes the most sense. At Image Biopsy Lab, for instance, I would argue, and I have the benefit of coming in after a lot of this has happened and sort of seeing how it, came to be. But we have a lot of strategic partners in radiology who are very excited about us, right? Who want to enter into partnerships where they're white labeling our product because we decided to go very deep on MSK. And that was a unique aspect that we bring that other sort of AI clinical decision support companies don't offer. They do a little bit of everything, whereas we just decided to go very, very deep and be very good in one area. Right. And so for the large radiology companies of the world, and there's only 3 or 4 of them, right, it's relieving that we've taken on a lot of that burden directly, right? But they sell large instruments. And so being able to couple the image output with our software overlaid is very valuable, right? I would argue that a lot of these things happen during the customer discovery, right? Very early on, should the company become a generalist or should we go very deep in one area, right? And you're only going to learn that by reaching out to strategics. The other thing is, we've mentioned sort of the fundraising aspects of it. A lot of these companies now have venture funds or corporate venture capital funds, right? And so there might even be 2 reasons to speak with them. One, in terms of thinking through what would make them very excited. But on the flip side, thinking through, could they maybe come in as a strategic if you had a lead investor and then you wanted some of these folks to participate, like Takeda and Novartis, et cetera, right? So, there's multiple avenues here.
So we did have a question from the attendees. What if at the end of the ICOR, the end of the MVP, you get that no-go that the pulmonologist had? What's the next step that you could take to salvage that technology? Or is it salvageable? Or to pivot based on your customer discovery?
Yeah. So I'll go back to the pulmonologist because, so frankly, I don't know what they did after the program, but you could imagine, depending on if it was a technical issue, they needed to go back and work in the lab more just to address some performance issues, or if it was a cost issue, or if it's a regulatory hurdle that they didn't anticipate. If it's something that could be overcome and they've learned about this problem through the customer discovery process, they're back to it. I think a number of companies, I wrapped up a 1-week session last night where teams do 15 customer discovery interviews over the course of a week. They could just say, forget it, we're not doing it. I had a team that had basically a bioprocessing technology. They did 15 real customer discovery interviews. In the end of the week, they said, you know what, we should be doing something else. So it depends on what hurdles they've encountered.
So in the earlier stages in the ICOR program or a program like ICOR, when do you tell teams that they should start thinking about having a board of governors and getting intellectual property protection for their discovery?
So I can speak very briefly to that because that doesn't come up in the ICOR class. So those are both post ICOR topics, which are both very important, but they don't happen within the 7 weeks, 100 interviews.
And have you seen anyone make mistakes in that they jump the gun and try to do it too early? Or they're pretty good because it costs money and they wait?
So speaking specifically about IP, or we're on the board of governors?
Both.
You know, I do have a cautionary tale when it comes to IP. I think one area there's so much focus on getting patents filed. The importance of patents are absolutely important in the life sciences space. Two traps. Number one, assuming that because they've got something that's new, useful, non-obvious, therefore patentable, means that somebody wants it, which of course is not true. You discover if somebody actually wants this solution through a completely different process that does not involve the USPTO. And the second is, especially these days, there's so many patents out there owned by so many different parties that you really run the risk that whatever you're doing could run afoul of somebody else's IP. And of course, this is called freedom to operate, or FTO. Most early stage companies, the ones that are raising pre-seed angel money, have not even thought about it.
Correct.
And this is the biggest, that's the biggest pitfall that you could run into, is if you spend all this time trying to launch a company just to discover a year or two later that somebody else has already patented your idea. That could be fatal.
Right.
So,
and they don't think about it because it costs a pretty penny in order to hire a firm to do that.
Yeah. So I can't tell you how many teams that we've walked through this process at LSA. They're going into a super crowded space, maybe in cardiovascular, and they haven't even begun to think about whether there's third-party patents out there, and they're pretty far along.
Yeah.
So we've made it a contingency for investing in them that they do at least a basic, and this is a negotiated process, a basic FTO with their counsel. And typically we define where they're going to search, how they're going to search, what's the geography of looking for different patents. Even we're open to a cost cap. And so a very common one would be, we're looking at issued patents in the US and Europe from certain competitors or certain assignees, and you have $15,000 to do it. If you do that and bring us back a sensible report from your patent counsel who did basically what we asked you to do, then we would be comfortable with the investment.
So I know that we have another minute or so left. I wanted to ask if there are any resources that our audience can go to learn more about the customer discovery process, about I-Core, about just what some of the topics that we spoke about today. If you can share that with the audience, they would, I'm sure, appreciate the referral.
I can identify Steve Blank's blog as just a wellspring of information around customer discovery. The sort of grandfather of customer discovery in lean startup, actually the father of customer discovery, the grandfather of lean startup, Steve Blank. Check out his blog. It's fantastic.
Great.
And it's indexed. You can look up topics.
Excellent. And I know that there are members of SOAP that are very into the early startup stages of life science company. This is an ecosystem that I encourage you all to join if you're in the life sciences. It's $80 a year, and there may be a chapter near you. And if not, there'll be webinars that you can join from anywhere in the world. So with that, I know that we're about to end our discussion today. I want to thank all the panelists, Nishta, Erica, Errol, Darren, and thank you, JJ and Kwan, for inviting us all here. I hope that we have done our job and have made the field a little more level in terms of the asymmetric information, and that the people who are listening can walk away with one pearl saying, I learned something today that made my time here worthwhile. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Jeff, very much. Can we open it up for questions, just in case we have any questions available? Anyone wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand. We'll bring you live, or if you want to put a question in the Q&A section, we can do that. We'll give it 30 seconds here, just in case anyone has any questions. Meanwhile, I will say thank you to all. Again, Jeff, thank you. Nishta, Erica, Errol, and Darren. Kwan, thank you very much for helping to put all this together. This is amazing. People are asking for contact information. Is it okay if we send them your email addresses?
Sure.
Okay, sounds great. All right, doesn't look like there are any other questions, but if you are all interested in joining the pitches that will be on Thursday, there's 12 companies out of 100 almost that were selected. I will invite you, and you're welcome to come. Thank you very much for being part of this. Have a good
Thanks,
day.
everyone.
Bye.